shop fans. I'm so excited today. We have special guest Michelle Ramsay. She does business under the name Quilts Made with Love, and she's a long arm quilter. And welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Kimberly.
Yeah, so we've started working with her, I guess, 2 years ago when we started with our very first Stronger Together quilt, and then worked with her last year, and then we invited her to be the designer for this year's quilt. So she's a long arm quilter. So do you want to talk about like everything you've done with us since the beginning of Stronger Together, like what you did the first year, the second year, and then this year?
Yeah, well, the first year I saw the wonderful quilt along that you guys were doing, and I said, I just have to be a part of this. So I messaged you and said, hey, can I do a giveaway? Can I give a
Oh yeah.
quilting away as a prize? And you guys said, sure. And so that was really fun. And then the second year, I did it again, really, and I was able to quilt two of the samples for the quilt along that Charisse did, and then I also did another giveaway that year, and now this year I'm the designer and quilter.
Yes, so it's so exciting. So she's a long arm quilter, and then this year the fabrics we used are linear and speckled from Rashida. So do you want to talk
Yeah.
about like how you picked your fabrics? I want to talk a little bit about the quilt.
Yeah, so well, the fabrics, it's funny, did the design for the quilt first and then picked out the fabrics. And I kind of went with a color scheme that I just love. I tend to love a good rainbow, but this is kind of the colors of the rainbow that I gravitate to more, which are the pinks and the blues. And I'm just in love with this palette. I've been trying to think about what I'm going to sew for the quilt along, and I just don't know that I can do anything else. I just fell in love with these fabrics and these colors, and they're so soft. And the backing is actually really cool. Just lots of different sketched out ladies with different cool hair textures and everything. And I just fell in love with that one.
Super cute. And so we're raising money for the UNCF, which provides college education for African Americans. And so we have raised, let's see how much this morning, $3,000, and we're trying to get to 7,000. And then Kevin and I are going to donate 7,000. So hoping to get to 14,000. So that's why we're hosting this today, so that you guys can donate. So Ashley has put the link in the description box. And then our donation, we're asking for $15 for the free pattern. So Michelle designed the pattern, we wrote the pattern, and we're providing it free on the Fat Quarter Shop website. And actually, all 3 years are free. So if you decide to do the quilt from like 2 years ago, it's free, but you can still donate to this year's campaign. So that would be awesome if y'all look at all three and then donate to our campaign. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
So did you want to talk about, I wanted to kind of show the quilting since you're a long arm quilter. And I've always struggled with, sorry, how about my notes? I've always struggled with when you have a dark fabric and then a light fabric, and then, a much lighter fabric. How do you pick the thread color? Because I think this is beautiful thread color on this quilt.
Yeah, that's something that everybody struggles with when there's high contrast in the quilt, really light, really dark, what color to go with. And really every case is going to be different. I think in this one, since the dark was representing the night sky and there were stars and everything, I thought, let's go with something sparkly, something that kind of goes along with that theme. And so we went with a lighter, I can't remember the exact color, but it was a lighter color that I wanted to stand out in the dark. And then sometimes, you end up going the opposite way where you want it to recede in the dark and stand out in the light. And then you could also go with something in the middle that kind of doesn't stand out too much in either one. But it really just depends. And so oftentimes I just throw all the different options onto the quilt and then just see which one I like better. So, and that's a conversation with your quilter. You kind of take pictures and send them back and forth.
Yeah, and we were also going to talk about pantographs and how you choose pantographs. So did you want to talk about your favorite 3 pantographs? Because I know that since we have a long arm quilter on, I want to get as much information to our customers about long arm quilting, because I don't know anything about long arm quilting. And so since you long arm for consumers, we could talk about pantographs, different tips on what you want people to do before they send their quilt to you, because that's like so beneficial. And you can find her on her website. We have her website and her Instagram in the description box.
Yeah, well, so picking a design, oh boy. So there's just an infinite number of designs available, and sometimes you just have an idea in your head that you want to run with it, and you could, tell your long arm quilter, I want something with flowers, or I want something geometric, or something and so whatever ideas you have, tell that to your quilter, and then they will be able to kind of direct you along those lines. And if not, your quilter will just kind of suggest things. And so about half of my customers say, I want this one. Okay. And so then I quilt that one. And then about half of them really have no idea. So I say, okay, so tell me, is this a quilt for, is it a gift? Tell me about the person it's going to. So there are certain designs that may be more masculine or feminine, or certain designs that will work better for kids, quilts for kids, for example. Or sometimes you want a design that will stand out and be a wow. And then sometimes if there's a lot going on the quilt top, you really want a design that will recede to the background. And so these are all different things that your long arm quilter will take into consideration when giving designs. So, and it's so hard to pick my favorites because there's just so many good ones. But my 3 favorites at the moment, one is, it's called Baptist Diamonds Curved. And I love this design because it's kind of like a Baptist fan, but it's just a little more modern, and it looks great on cotton quilts, but it also looks fabulous on t-shirt quilts. I scale it up a little bit bigger so that it's not too dense and provides a lot of good drape to the quilt. So I've quilted this on a bunch of t-shirt quilts lately, and I just love it. It looks great really on anything, and it's definitely a design that recedes more, I think. And so like on this quilt, the t-shirts and the memories from the t-shirts really stand out more so than the quilting. So that's one. And then the next one is one called Midnight Sparkle. And this just works in so many scenarios. So this is one that I did. This is a Christmas quilt, and it looks great on holiday quilts, but also the next one is not a holiday quilt, and it still looks great on that one too. It has a little bit of sparkle in it with the stars. It's got stars and swirls, and so it just is a really versatile design that looks good on so many things. It's a winner always. And then the last one is definitely a wow design if you want to just take it up a notch. It's one's called Raindrops on Water, and anytime I've used it, it just really gives a nice fun punch to quilts. And this is a quilt that I made for my nephew. It's a Meadowland quilt pattern, and I thought with the solid fabrics I could really have a lot of fun with the quilting, and so I picked this one, and it just looks so good. Every time I see that picture, it just wows me.
And that's like totally the colors that people are putting in their baby nurseries. I feel like it's just the very neutrals. So
yeah, it was a good one.
Yeah. So
and then
go ahead.
Also, so you asked about before you ship off your quilts to a long arm quilter. So let's talk about that real quick. My number one tip is to iron or press your quilt tops really well, And when you do that, it allows you to just check and make sure that your seams are all good. So press it before you fold it up to ship. And then the second tip is to make sure your quilt and backing are completely enclosed in a plastic bag of some sort before you ship it off to your quilter. Just in case, you never know if it's going to get left out in the rain or whatever, you know, you never know what's going to happen. And so it just provides that extra level of security to make sure your quilt will stay in tip-top condition. So those are my 2 tips.
And then I would say also, like, insure it. Anytime I send mine off, I insure it just because of the time it took to make it. Just, you know, I feel like I feel like the shipping company would be more likely to find it if it's insured.
Right, right. Tracking info too is crucial.
Yes. So how many quilts do you quilt every month, do you think?
Oh boy. I generally shoot for 4 or 5 a week.
Oh, wow.
So in a month, that would be 20.
Okay, awesome.
18 to 20 quilts in a month, yeah.
And do you do like do your customers tend to gravitate toward like one kind of design, or do you have quilters from like all kinds of different styles?
Definitely all kinds of styles.
Okay.
For sure. And then even some quilters will have one that's more traditional and then one that's more contemporary or modern. So even the quilters that I work with tend to dabble in all kinds of quilting.
We have a question from Crystal that says, how long do you like the backing to be for you to long arm from the top?
Oh, that's a good question. So in order to load it up on my machine, it needs to be at least 3. I tend to ask for 4 inches bigger on all sides. So if your quilt top is 60 by 60, I'd like for the backing to be 68 by 68. So about 4 inches bigger on all sides.
And then I have a question. Sometimes I'll just send it and it's way too big. Like, it's not good to do that, right?
No, it's fine. I would much rather the backing be way too big.
Okay.
And if it is, I will trim. I can either send it back just big like that, or I could trim off the edges and return it back to you. If the overage is only 1 or 2 inches, I generally won't return that if I trim it. But if it's a significant amount where you could reuse it for another project, then I will send that back to you.
I think another thing we could talk about is I always ask my long arm quilter to not trim it because I like to leave a little bit of batting for the binding to be a little bit puffier. So is that something that, like, on your forum, do the customers select trim, not trim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, okay. That is definitely an option. And some people have different requirements for trimming. Some people like it trimmed right to the edge of the quilt top, and some people like it trimmed less than 1/8 of an inch of batting showing. So everybody has different preferences. And so I definitely check first.
And then someone had asked if you charge by the inch of thread, or do you charge for the overall design based on the size?
So I have a flat rate based on the size of the quilt.
Okay, that makes it easy.
And so, yeah. But everybody does it a little bit differently. I don't have a thread fee, or some people charge per bobbin. The more thread that's in the quilt, it costs more, so they charge for that. But I just have a flat rate at the moment.
And you started quilting about 10 years ago. Do you want to talk about how you started and then how you transitioned into long arm quilting?
Sure. Well, I had a nesting urge when I was pregnant with my oldest child, who is now 12. And so I just really wanted to make her something. And at the time, I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. So I just decided I was going to make something, and it turned out that something was a quilt. And so I borrowed a machine from a friend, and I went to the local quilt shop in my area and took a class. And I think that one class really gave me enough information to really just run with it. And from there, I just looked on blogs and on the internet, and That was when Flickr was a thing. People were posting pictures of their quilts on Flickr. That was pre-Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I have that first quilt that I ever made, if you want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my best work.
And so that was for your daughter, right?
Well, actually, this one was just something to get started. And so this one wasn't necessarily for my daughter. And I walked into the quilt shop and she said, so go ahead and pick fabrics. Mm-hmm. And I was so overwhelmed that she picked, the owner of the shop picked out fabric for me because I couldn't, I didn't know where to start. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important if you are in that position of starting to just go for it and don't worry about it being the best thing you've ever made or, if you're being really indecisive about colors to use. This is just the first of many, many quilts that you will make. Yeah. And so you get to experiment with different colors and different palettes on every one. So this is not a quilt that sees a lot of use around here because it's just not a palette that I use very much anymore. I tend to stick to pinks and blues and actually I think I have any fall quilts, so I should put this one out in fall because that's definitely a more fall palette where I tend to be spring and other things.
And Two Through, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, said, what sewing machine do you use for your piecing?
I have a Juki.
Okay, which one?
And it's the TL
2010?
TL 98.
Oh,
maybe.
Yeah, that's what I have.
It's a Juki straight stitch.
That's what I have.
And that's the challenge for quilters is that a lot of the machines that are really good for piecing are just straight stitch machines. And so if you kind of have to have multiple machines then. So I have a Bernina, I can't remember it's an old model, all mechanical Bernina that I use for zigzag if I need to do a zigzag stitch. But 95% of the time when I'm sewing, I just need a really quality straight stitch machine. And so I love my Juki for that.
Oh yeah, me too. I love it. And then when you moved to long arm, what kind of long arm do you have and how did you move from just,
Yeah, so going back to the story, I just started piecing quilts and loved it. And then I would say maybe 5 years in, an aunt asked me if I would make her a t-shirt quilt for her kids' clothes. She was cleaning out. And at first I said, that's not really my thing, but I just tried it and it was fun and I made a little bit of money from it. So I got into making t-shirt quilts started out with friends and family, and then it was a business. And then it turned out that quilting at the time I had just a regular domestic. I didn't even have the Juki. I was stippling these quilts on my home domestic machine, and that was a little challenging. So I saved up and purchased my first long arm quilting machine, which was an APQS Ultimate 2, which is an ancient long arm. The instructional video was actually a VHS, if that says anything about how old this machine was. But it was a workhorse for me, and it wasn't stitch regulated, it wasn't computerized or anything. And that was kind of how I learned how to long arm quilt for people. And it was all hand guided. I loved doing that. And then after a year or so of that, I realized I really like this long arm quilting thing more than making t-shirt quilts. So I transitioned my business to quilting for other people, long arm quilting for other people, and I phased out. I no longer make t-shirt quilts for people. And then I bought a new machine. Okay. So now I quilt on a Bernina Q24 with Qmatic, so it's computerized. And so I have this a large library of designs, and I'm constantly adding more designs to it. And I love using this machine. It's really fun.
And Patty has a question that I was going to kind of turn into a question that I have too. Well, one of the things, I'll ask Patty's question in a second, but I have noticed from doing this for so long, 20 years ago, everyone was into custom quilting. And I feel like, custom, pantograph, it all kind of cycles. But do you feel like right now everyone wants a pantograph and no custom? Or do you feel like that's changed? Because I do feel like that changes with, like, every year it's different.
Yeah, there's definitely phases. And I think right now, pantographs are super popular. I do get asked about custom quilting, and certain quilts honestly just need it. If you look at certain quilt tops, sometimes they just demand custom quilting. And I hate to do an edge to edge on a quilt that just is really asking for custom. So, yeah, it's a skill that's never going to go away. I think custom quilting is really important, and the people that do it well. And I used to do custom because when I was freehand, I felt like you kind of just have to get good at it. I don't know. There are freehand quilters that just do pantographs, but a lot of freehand quilters also do custom quilting, and it's definitely a skill where use it or lose it. Every now and then I like to practice my feathers just to make sure I can still do them.
Yeah.
And actually I did a custom quilt over the holidays for a family friend. And again, it was just a quilt that just needed it. Like she had said, oh, just, do loops or swirls or an edge to edge on it. And I said, no, this needs, this needs custom. So I really hope, I don't think it's going to go away. I think, the other thing though is that we're starting to recognize the worth of that service, and so I think people that do custom quilting need to charge what it's worth, and recognize that you're not going to pay the same edge to edge prices.
Right.
Custom quilting is a premium service that deserves a premium wage. And so I hope that even people that are just starting out in custom quilting should charge twice what their edge to edge rate is.
Yes.
At a minimum, and recognize the premium, the worth of that. Yeah.
And then Alice is asking, like, if you just have a quilt, how would you know if you should go with pantograph or with custom, and would you ask your quilter?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Oh boy. It really all depends on the quilt top, obviously. The one that I did over the holidays was unique because someone had already started hand quilting it and recognized they weren't going to be able to finish the hand quilting. And so I was trying to finish the quilt in a very similar style as the hand quilting what had been started. And so that was why that one in my opinion, needed custom. And then other ones, if I had done a vintage quilt, had been pieced by a friend's grandmother, and she wanted it finished, and it just had these wide open
spaces.
And it needed some pretty feathers in there. And I actually did a combination on that one of computerized custom work, so it wasn't all freehand. It was some freehand and sometimes just programming the computer to do different things in different spaces. But yeah, that's definitely a conversation with your quilter. I think quilts that have open space in certain places could be one of those times where this could be really fun done custom. So that's one thing to look out for. And also, if you're going to enter it in a show, custom quilting is definitely something you might want to consider. If it's a utilitarian quilt that's going to be on your couch or on your bed, or if it's a quilt for a child, custom just seems like it would be kind of overkill, kind of unnecessary. But if it's going to hang on the wall, that it would just really be so fun to walk by every day and see this quilt with this spectacular quilting on it. So those are things to think about. How is it going to be used? Is it going to be in a show?
And Lisa wants to know, I think this is a great question, what's the most difficult part of your long arm quilting?
Oh boy. Yeah. So when things go wrong, and that happens more often than one would think. It's tricky keeping tension um
Mm-hmm.
looking good both on the top and the
Mm-hmm.
bottom. And so I saw a long arm quilter post about how she was hanging out underneath her machine more than she wanted to. And yeah, we have to get under our machines to check and see
Mm-hmm.
what the tension looks like on the back, and troubleshooting. And even with brand new machines, you will have to do lots of troubleshooting. And sometimes you're on the phone with your dealer or with customer service
Mm-hmm.
trying to just figure out, okay, what's wrong here? Is it the needle? Is it the thread? Is it do I have the quilt loaded too
Mm-hmm.
tight? You don't want it to be stretched too tight. It has
Mm-hmm.
to be a little bit loose. And so there's a lot to it. It's really not just um, pressing play on your
Right.
computer. There's a lot more to it. So yeah, the troubleshooting, and as you gain more experience, you learn more of how to fix common
Mm-hmm.
problems.
I always thought it would be really hard to like load it to the machine, especially if it was big. Like, I feel like I would just get a workout with like putting the bottom on and then the batting and then the top.
Yeah. I get a lot of steps in walking
Yeah.
around when I'm loading for sure.
Yeah. When Pamela has a great question, when someone is looking for a long arm quilter, what should they look for?
Oh, yeah. I would look for someone that has a similar design style to
Yep.
yours. If they're quilting a lot of quilts that you feel like are similar to what you make,
Mm-hmm.
then that's a good thing. Definitely, and I don't want to say only go with people that have experience, because everybody has to start
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. Um, but yeah, you want someone who's experienced, I guess, or is charging an appropriate amount.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times when you're new, you can charge a little bit less,
Mm-hmm.
and then as you gain more experience, you can charge more. But yeah, looking for someone who does quality work. They should show lots of pictures of what they've done, and not just overall shots, but kind of detail shots.
Mm-hmm.
You want to see those stitches and see that they're quality stitches, and want to work with someone that uses quality thread, quality batting, has a quality machine, because all these things really do matter for the
Mm-hmm.
longevity of your quilting. You want something that's going to hold up over the long term.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to move back to Stronger Together, talk about the quilt, and then we're going to
Yeah.
come back to more
Yeah.
questions. I
Okay.
wanted to like start off with showing it. So what we give you at Fat Quarter is the free pattern, and I just kind of wanted to talk about. You just download this. It's really easy. It's a PDF, and so obviously Michelle Ramsay designed it, and it's a very easy quilt. I wanted you to talk about the design inspiration for the quilt and then the different bios that are within the patterns.
Yeah. So I was just struck with this idea about um, the outdoors. So I live in Berea, Kentucky, and there are so many beautiful outdoor spaces here that I love to enjoy. And I wasn't always an outdoorsy person. I still don't think I'm outdoorsy. I'm working towards it. But I just realized the benefits that come with getting outside and moving my body, getting in nature. And so I was just inspired by Black Americans that have had a major impact
Mm-hmm.
on the outdoors and contributed to our appreciation of the outdoors and exploration. So, and actually, the first person I knew I wanted to highlight was a man named York. And I have this book here um, that is a biography, a picture book biography of him. And he was an enslaved man, and he was on the Lewis and Clark expedition that I think they were hired by Thomas Jefferson to explore the western part of the United States, and they were the first group to go. Did they make it all the way to the Pacific Ocean? I can't remember. But he didn't have a choice. He was on this journey, and all the other people that were in that expedition went voluntarily and were paid, and he was not. But he was a significant member of that group that went on this journey, and actually the guy that wrote this book lives in Berea, or not too far away, and he does a presentation where he dresses up like York and goes to schools and gives this whole talk about him, and he's kind of just a forgotten person in history. And so anyway, so the mountains are inspired by York and his journey and this contributions he made on that trip. And then the stars are inspired by Katherine Johnson, who was a mathematician with NASA and was instrumental in the NASA space missions in the 1950s and 60s. And so the stars are inspired by her. And then the other person that will come up in the pattern, his name is Charles Young. And so there's a park in Lexington, Kentucky is maybe 30, 45 minutes away from me. And there's a park in Lexington called Charles Young Park. And I remember saying, who is Charles Young? I don't know who that is. He's got a park named after him, so he must be somebody significant in history. And it turns out that he was the first national park superintendent. He was a colonel in the military, the first black colonel. And in that time, the military was charged with taking care of our parks and national treasures. And so he built roads and made the park, I think it was Sequoia Park out in California, and he made the park much more accessible so that people could get out and enjoy it. And so the mountains are also inspired by him, and then the peaks on the mountain kind of look like paths. And so that kind of is how he's figured in there too. And so these are just all three people that inspired me to want to get outside and be grateful for the contributions that Black Americans have made to the outdoors and nature and science. So yeah, so that's kind of how that came about.
I love it. Do you want to talk about the Quilt Along? At Fat Quarter Shop, we do have a quilt kit, and I forgot to mention earlier that if you buy the kit, the pattern is already pre-printed for you, so you don't have to download it. But of course, the pattern is completely free if you want to print it yourself. But I wanted you to talk about the details, how people can sew along with both of us.
Yeah, so first make your donation and pick up the pattern.
Yes. Yeah, we're gonna look. We're gonna look in a minute and see if y'all are really donating, so I can call you out if you haven't.
Yeah, it's kind of on the honor system here. Yeah. So, but yeah, so the Quilt Along will primarily be on Instagram. And so it's a quilt along and a stitch along. It's also available in a cross stitch format. And so it starts February 1st, which is also the kickoff for Black History Month. And so just every week there's going to be blocks to make and prompts. And so the prompts will be, I will be challenging you to get outside and go for a walk or go look at the stars. So there's an outdoor component to this, and that's optional. But just every week you'll just post progress pictures and share how you are enjoying the outdoors that week, and then there's going to be tips along the way, and prizes, of course. And so every week, if you post a picture of your stitching progress or quilting progress, you'll be eligible to win certain prizes. And so it's just going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to connecting with everybody else that's quilting along and stitching along.
Awesome. And then they'll need to follow both of us just so that they can, the giveaways you're going to do. So if y'all aren't following Michelle, then you won't know how to do the giveaway, or you won't be able to enter.
Right.
Right. And at the end of the show, we are going to do a giveaway of some kits today also.
Oh, fun.
So is there anything else you wanted to talk about with this quilt before we go back to questions about long arm quilting? Because people are putting in a ton of questions.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so Michelle is asking, do you feel that the long arm quilting part of a quilt is a creative side? Hold on, let me start over. Do you feel that the long arm quilting part of your quilt is a creative side in making a quilt, or is it just a utilitarian in finishing the quilt?
I think it can be both. So it's important. The quilting is what makes it a quilt, separates it from being just a blanket. It holds the 3 layers together. So it is utilitarian in that aspect. But it's also creative in that you get to pick out a design that complements the top. That can be another creative element. You get to play around with the color of the thread and the density. And yeah, when I used to finish quilts on my domestic machine at home, it was fun to try out different styles, and so that was a skill in itself. Was quilting on my home machine. So yeah, I think it's definitely another element of creativity, and I love. It's one of my favorite things to do is to go back and forth with my customers on picking a design that will complement their quilt top the best. Absolutely.
Because I do think some quilts you want the quilting to show, some quilts you don't, and picking the design and the thread, like you talked about earlier, it either recedes or, really stands out, and all of that really does make a difference.
Absolutely.
And Patty, it is going to be a quilt along and a cross stitch along. And so on both channels, I'll be showing my progress on both. Patty asks, have you ever gotten wonky quilts or badly pieced puffy quilt tops? How do you compensate for them?
Okay. Yes, I think every long arm quilter has had that experience, and really just do the best you can. So the first thing I do is get in touch with the piecer and say, I'm having some issues here. Is it okay to use starch? Sometimes I'll use a spray bottle of just water and iron, and that can sometimes help flatten any fullness. And sometimes that doesn't work, and I get out spray starch. I don't want to use that without asking first, so I'll ask. And sometimes they might want to fix it. They might want, if it's like wavy borders or something that's easy to fix, maybe that's something they can take back and reattach the borders so that it's not wavy. But it's definitely a conversation with the customer. And then, and most of the time they'll say, just do your best. Once they hand it off to me, they don't want to get it back unless it's quilted. Yeah, and I think there is an understanding that I'm not a miracle worker. So many times they say, oh, that'll quilt out.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So it definitely will work to find a design that will help to absorb the fullness, and that is definitely something that will help certain designs work better to hide wonky piecing or fullness than others. So yeah, it happens, but I think if we can let go of perfectionism for a second and just realize the point is to end up with a finished quilt that you can snuggle under, that you can give to somebody to celebrate your friendship or a special occasion. And so I think for the most part, everybody ends up super happy with the finished product. And yeah, it's important to not get too hung up on perfectionism.
I did always kind of wonder, because when you're new, obviously you're not going to be as precise, but if you did a pantograph that was more spread out, that would kind of hide it a little bit more, right? Rather than if you did a tiny pantograph, I feel like you would see the mistakes more than if you used something that was more flowy.
Yeah, I think you really need something in the middle.
Okay.
Because the more quilting lines, you actually have more space to kind of absorb the fullness, if that makes sense. But you don't want too dense, because then you're more likely to get a tuck. So, but yeah, something kind of in the middle. And swirls tend to work well. There's just lots of places to kind of take in that fullness.
Yeah, like suck it up.
If it makes sense. Yeah, exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about thread on, because this, if you look at this quilt, I think the thread is really awesome because it's got kind of a metallic look and it's a little bit thicker. So can you talk about what threads you use or what threads you would recommend if somebody is doing something at home on their home machine?
Oh boy. So there's a lot of kinds of thread out there, and I know that most quilters will say they have a favorite. So I know that on my machine, when I'm quilting, I prefer glide thread. It gives me the least amount of tension issues. I have pre-wound glide bobbins that I like to use in my bobbin, so the tension is a lot more consistent with that. So that is my preference. It's available in so many colors that I'm totally happy to pick up new colors if someone has a request. And I think when I quilted on my home machine, I was much more comfortable trying out different kinds of thread. I used more cottons. I used kind of whatever, but I know with my long arm now, I tend to stick to glide, and I just don't like to experiment as much because I know anytime I have it there's just a greater potential for something to go wrong. But I know lots of quilters that will use multiple kinds, but I know that if you don't like the sheen of glide, there are other threads that we could try that have less sheen. But every kind of thread has its pros and cons. I know that some people really prefer cotton thread, and so they prefer to quilt with cotton. It really comes up to your personal preference and what works better for your machine, because every machine just has its own quirks and tends to like certain things more than others. And we just want a seamless experience with the best tension that also looks good. So I encourage people to try out things, that work for them and see what feels better, what's easier for you and your machine.
And for batting, do you have a certain brand? And then also, do you have like a certain type that you like, or does your customer pick?
So I work almost exclusively with Quilter's Dream.
If
you're purchasing batting from me, it's going to be Quilter's Dream. And so I carry their cotton, their 80/20, and wool and bamboo. So I have those four. And I would say my favorite lately has been the bamboo batting. It just has such a great drape to it. Even if I'm doing dense quilting, sometimes with dense quilting, the quilt can be a little bit stiff, but I feel like with the bamboo that never happens. And so that's been my go-to. And I love the look of wool batting. It's just so puffy, and it almost looks like an old-fashioned, comforter, that kind of puffy thickness. So I think the next quilts that I make for myself, I'm going to try out the wool. I haven't made any for me with the wool batting, but every time I use it for a customer, it's just, oh, this is so fabulous. Why don't I use this more?
And can you talk about the different thickness for people who are like newer or, don't know much about that?
Yeah. So the thickness of batting is called the loft. And I would say that cotton batting is probably the lowest loft. And then the challenge is they sell it in like 4 different options. So check and see what, your quilter has. But overall, on average, cotton batting is probably the thinnest loft. And then an 80/20 is slightly more than that. And then bamboo is probably equal to about an 80/20, but then wool is just puffy. And so it just has a thicker look to it. And wool, I think, also is super breathable. It keeps you warmer in the winter, but also works surprisingly well for summer quilts too.
And do you ever use polyester batting?
I don't. If someone provides it, I will use it. But have never carried 100% polyester batting. I know some people do because it's a great budget option. It's a lot cheaper. But it's never been a popular request.
Right.
So I haven't carried it.
I was just curious, is it thicker than wool, or is wool about the same as the polyester thickness, loft?
That's a really good question. And I am not 100% sure.
Oh, okay. And then with the wool from Quilter's Dream, do you wash and machine dry it, or does it have certain requirements because it's wool that you have to take care of it differently?
Yeah, I think it needs to be air dried.
Yep.
Or tumble dried on no heat.
Yes.
Like just the fluff setting.
Yeah, I would say anybody who uses wool, just you can wash it in the machine, but you just don't dry it by machine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or no heat. The heat can cause weird things to happen to the wool.
Can you talk about the process of loading the quilt sandwich on the long arm? For Pamela, she says it looks complicated.
Yeah, so it's different for every machine, but overall, you start with the backing, and you load it onto these rollers. And I have a video on my Instagram page of me loading up, but there's different ways of attaching the backing fabric to the rollers. I use pins, but there's other strategies to do that. Some people use magnets. Some people use these long red tubes called red snappers. But the first step is that you're loading the backing fabric on, and then I go into the top fabric, or the quilt top next, and then once I have that loaded, I'll put the batting.
There's a phone coming through. Can you put do not disturb on my phone? Sorry, my phone is.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, and so that's why it's important when you send the quilt top to your quilter, you send them separately. I know that some people in the past may have already pin basted their backing, batting, and quilt top, and then decided they didn't want to quilt it, and then sent it to me. But
it just hung up now.
Do need to be loaded separately.
Hold on. Why is it not? Sorry.
Oh no.
Okay.
Hello?
Hey, okay, sorry. My daughter was calling, and I'm going to text her to stop calling. So keep going.
Yeah, so they all get loaded separately is the summary of that. And you can kind of there's different ways to do it, but I tend to load the backing first, and then put the top on the roller, and then put the batting
in the center,
and then flatten out the top. Yeah. So,
do you have anything you listen to while you are doing long arming?
I listen to podcasts and audiobooks.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you use Audible? I love Audible, but it is so expensive. I had to stop my subscription. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. So.
Yeah, I do Audible or get them from the library.
Oh, yeah.
From the public library. Yeah.
And then we're going to pop up your Instagram name so everybody can know where to find you. They want to see some of your past work, so.
Oh, yeah. I do have some quilts
let's show
down
them
here that I could show. And this one was actually before I had my long arm. So, but it is it's a Lizzie House pattern, her Meadowland quilt pattern. And this is just one of my favorite quilts. It was a class, actually, that it was never sold just as a pattern. You had to take the class. And the inset circle technique that I did here, I was just so proud of that. It was really hard. It felt really hard at the time. Anytime you learn something new, it's super challenging, and I was just really proud of that. And I did this quilting with my walking foot, actually.
Wow.
I don't know if you can see the quilting stitches in there. But yeah, I feel like you don't see people as much quilting on their home machines anymore. And so I never want people to think they have to finish their quilts with a long arm quilter. And I know it's silly for me as a long arm quilter to say that.
Yeah.
But when I started quilting, I couldn't afford that. And so I just want people to know finishing your quilts at home is 100% an option. And you can have like stunning and really memorable quilts finished that way. Okay, so that's that one. And then I have a sleeping cat on this quilt. Hold on.
Oh, I want to see the kitty.
Your kitty. He is kind of on the last. He's an old cat.
He's pretty.
Yeah, he's sweet.
He's like, don't take my quilt, Mommy.
He was just at the vet, so he has had something down there. But okay, Kitty. Okay.
Aww.
You can go on that quilt now. And then this one, I remember this one because I pieced it with my daughter. It was really fun when I was waiting for my new long arm to arrive. There was just a lot of downtime. And so I made a scrap quilt with my daughter while we were waiting for the long arm. And so it's a rainbow scrappy quilt, and then quilted it with wavy lines.
It's pretty.
And so yeah, that's a really fun one. I have a lot of scrap quilts, actually. This is a red, white, and blue, and it's a super simple pattern. Because it's kind of, this is the quilt that I take like for picnics and stuff if I'm ever kind of just out. I'm not afraid to put this one on the ground. You have to have one quilt that you're okay with throwing on the grass, and you never know what's gonna get on it. But I just had a lot of red, white, and blue fabrics in my scrap bin, so I decided to make a red, white, and blue. Well,
is that background like flannel? It looks flannel. No?
It's like a chambray.
Oh, okay, like a Robert Kaufman chambray.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
Definitely. So, yeah. So those are just a taste of quilts.
And someone is asking about the quilt behind you. She wants to know if she can see it all, and what's the pattern designer.
So this is an Elizabeth Hartman pattern, actually. I think it was from her book, The Practical Guide to Patchwork.
Okay.
So, and that Elizabeth Hartman book was like my Bible. I made quite a few quilts from it, and she gives really great tips in that book on how to quilts you're at home.
Okay.
And so I feel like I did a lot of those, and so it's really just a square and square, and this was Alice in Glass fabric that the triangles are printed on there. So I didn't. Some people see this and they think that I piece the triangles in, and they're not. But it's Alice in Glass fabric. Oh, and the fun thing about this quilt is that she the backing uses the scraps. And so I love it when a pattern like writes into the pattern how to do something fun on the backing. So quilt party in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is definitely one of the popular quilts over here at my house.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't even know about that book. Do you think that book is still in print?
Gosh, it's old.
I've never even heard of it.
But I'm sure you can find it on eBay or you know, Amazon secondhand. But yeah, before she started doing all of her animal patterns, she had some, you know, just basic patterns. But yeah, she's been around for a while. I have followed her for a long time.
Did you want to talk about how your business changed when you were mentioned on the Martha Stewart blog?
Yeah, so that was really surprising. I did not expect that at all.
Did you not know in advance?
No, no,
Oh,
I didn't.
okay.
No. So I guess that was 2 or 3 years ago now. I can't even remember. But she found 10 quilters you should be following on Instagram, and I was on that list. And so it was maybe 6 months after I had purchased my new machine, and I had been really experimenting with taking good pictures, and I also had a photo session with me in front of some of the quilts that I had quilted, just for headshots. And I think some of those photos just really turned out so good that when her editors were scrolling through, she saw something must have caught their eye, and so I was on this list. And it really was an honor, and also just a confirmation that whatever I was doing it well. And so it was encouragement to keep going. I felt like I was one of the newer quilters, or less, I had fewer followers than most of the other people on that list. And so I felt like, do I really belong here? But it kind of was confirmation that I was doing something right. So
who told you? Like, did a friend have the magazine, or a customer? Like, how did you find out you were in there?
I honestly don't even remember. I don't remember. I just somebody must have tagged me.
Okay.
I'm not sure, or maybe somebody else that was also on the list had mentioned. I'm not. It was such a blur, but it was certainly an honor.
And I'm going to ask some questions that came in before.
Okay.
If you're like somebody who is a younger quilter, like maybe a teenager or younger, where would you send them to start?
Oh boy. Probably YouTube. Everything's on YouTube these days. There's so many tutorials. Any of your quilt tutorials on the Fat Quarter Shop YouTube, because books, when I was starting, books were a big thing. Yep. But you almost feel like now you can get all the knowledge just on the internet. And I would say just start, and don't worry about doing everything the right way. I think, like I said before, just go for it, and don't worry about perfection. Just start cutting up fabric and sewing it back together.
Yeah. What is the pattern? Do you know the pattern name on the triangle quilt you did with your daughter?
Oh, yes. That was
Donna was asking.
It's from a book, Emily Cier, Cier. It's scrap. I'll have to think. Okay. I'll have to think about it. But it's from a book, some sort of a scrappy, it was a rainbow scrappy quilting book, something like that. But I will look that up and get back to you on that.
Okay. You already talked about your first quilt project. Someone wanted to know your day-to-day schedule and how you're weightlifting fit in that daily schedule. And I was like, okay, this person knows a lot about her.
I wonder who asked that question, because I have mentioned in the past that I am a weightlifter, and I've probably been doing it now for 2 years. I think I started during COVID.
Oh, okay.
And I have a home gym set up in my basement, and on good days I get up at 5:30 and do it, and if not, I'll work out right after I take my kids to school. But 4 days a week I lift, 2 upper, 2 lower, and it's really fun. I'm kind of obsessed. A lot of the podcasts I listen to are nutrition and weightlifting podcasts, and so it's like a side hobby thing. But yeah, it's just the concept of lifting weights to be strong, and so the emphasis is on being strong, not being skinny. Right. What can my body do, not what can I lose.
Right.
So I just really like that emphasis.
Yeah.
And also it kind of ties in with getting outside and moving my body, because I try to also get, 8 or 10,000 steps in every day. So, yeah, so I don't know who asked that question, but you must have heard me mention that.
And then I think we think the book by Emily Sear is Scrap Republic.
Yes,
okay.
That's it.
Okay, so we'll try to find it, but if it's discontinued, you could probably find it on Amazon or Etsy. Yeah, we just got the same question from Kathy, so she answered that. We answered the next one. Someone is a Berea alum, class of 02, and so you live in Berea, Kentucky, right?
Berea, yeah.
So she's asking, how has living in Berea impacted your art?
That's a really good question. So Berea is kind of known as the arts and crafts capital of Kentucky. There is a thriving arts community here, and it's just woven into the fabric of Berea.
Okay.
There's lots of people that make things, and so I would say, yeah, there's definitely a community of people here that just believe that you should be able to make a living doing art, and that you should be able. It's a really important contribution to the world and to the community to have people that make art. And the Berea Arts Council here in town does so many fun events to celebrate art in all its different forms. And the Berea College has a ceramics department, a woodworking department, broom making, just tons of different crafts. There's definitely a community here, and there's lots of support for people looking to find a community of people that are creative and support the arts. So I would say, yeah, definitely just lots of people have reached out to me over the years about wanting to support my business. So I think being here has definitely helped me to succeed, for sure.
That sounds really supportive.
Yeah, it's a great community.
I want to thank our customers, because we started at 44% of our goal, and now we're at 56%. So that's awesome.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Wow.
When you're sewing a quilt, what colors? We kind of talked about you tend to use a lot of pink and aqua. When you're choosing thread, is there a certain thread color you gravitate to when you're piecing or when you're long arming?
So when I'm piecing, I probably stick to either a gray or a beige.
Okay.
But also, if I'm working with dark fabrics, I will use a darker. So I also use a lot of navy, or darker gray. I think the most important thing is having a variety of lighter and medium and darker fabrics, because what I've noticed is that when you piece, your threads don't always show through, but occasionally, especially if you press open, you'll kind of see just a little bit of those threads. So even if the color doesn't match necessarily, you just want the shade range to match. So it's important to have some light, some medium, and some dark. And on average, I'll have just a medium thread that I use kind of for most things, and then I'll change it up. But I don't have a rainbow of thread colors for piecing like I do for quilting. It's much more important, the color choice on the quilting, because it stands out a lot more. And I am slowly expanding my rainbow of thread colors for quilting. And so anytime someone says, "Oh, I want a blue thread," then I kind of go nuts, and I'm like, "Okay, so I'll buy 8 blues today." and then my blue section will get bigger. And so I have a lot of blues. I have quite a few greens and yellows and corals. But I'm still working on expanding my reds or oranges or colors that aren't used as much.
Do you have a preference when quilters send their quilt? Does it matter to you if it's they press open or press to the side. Does that affect the quilting in any way?
No,
Yeah.
no. It's just important that it's pressed one or the other, because as I'm loading, if some of the seams haven't been pressed at all, it's just harder to get a smooth finish on the quilt. And so then it's me trying to decide for them, should I press this? Then I have an iron right next to my long arm, and so I think it's the same one that we're giving away during the second week.
Okay.
It's a Panasonic cordless iron. And so then I will press it, whatever works easier in the quilt. But I think that's a decision that the quilter should be making, or the customer should be making, not me. Right. And it does make more work for me, so I prefer if the customer does it. But either way, really just depends on the quilt pattern.
How did you start out teaching with your daughter? Like, her granddaughter wants to sew, but she's terrified she will sew her little fingers.
Oh.
Like, what age did you do?
So when we worked on this one together, she was probably 8 or 9. And, that's a really good question. I think for the most part, when they're really young, you're right with them every stitch they're sewing, and then you start off maybe even letting them press the pedal and you're guiding the fabric. That could be, I'm sure we've done that before. And then I would let her put one hand on the fabric, but I'm also holding it to make sure it's still going straight. And then I remember as we worked on this quilt, by the end of it, I felt comfortable walking away and letting her sew straight lines without me being there. And also, this was a good pattern for that because, so like the first step you did was really sewing. So pretend like we're just looking at this one triangle. You would sew this fabric to this fabric, and it didn't need to be a precise quarter-inch seam. So picking a pattern that doesn't need to be super precise is a good place to start. It's better to have a bigger, you don't want it to go smaller than quarter-inch, but it could go bigger. And if it wasn't super straight, it didn't matter because you were going to cut it down to this shape. So as long as overall you had something bigger than that, you could cut it down. So I felt it was a really forgiving pattern to start with. So just make sure you're choosing a pattern that doesn't have to be super precise, because you don't want to, you just want it to be a nice, easy, relaxing experience, and you don't want to harp on them too much about doing things wrong. So.
Well, I think it's awesome that your daughter quilts with you, because mine refuses to. Like, I used to ask her and I just stopped because she's like, no, I'm not doing it. And I'm just like, okay. She's like, she will have nothing to do with it. But when her friends come over, she's always like, oh, you got to see my mom's like sewing room. It's really cute. And I'm like, oh, but you won't sew. So my new thing is, like, I've asked some of her friends, do y'all want to learn? Like, I could teach you, because I thought, like, then she would do it, and they were like, no.
Peer pressure?
They were like, no, that looks too hard.
Yeah, and I will say, we made this together, like I said, 2 or 3 years ago, and we haven't really quilted since then. I did help her make a Halloween costume, and that was fun, but that was her coming to me and saying, I want to make this. So, you can't make your kids do anything, really. No, so it has to be, or you pick and choose what you want to make them do. It has to be mutually something that both of you want to do together. So.
Yeah, one of my parent philosophies is you really have to pick your battles. And the problem in the Jolly House is there's 4 children that are all different. And so we're picking different battles. And they're like, well, why did that person get to do this? And I'm like, well, maybe
I didn't want to pick that battle.
Yeah, I'm like, I'll pick that battle with you, but maybe not. It's hard because everyone's so different. But oh my gosh, sometimes I'm just like, I just don't want to do that battle today. Today, I just know I'm not going to win. So I'm going to give that up.
Right. Yes. yes. Same in this house for sure.
And then is Quilts Made with Love your full-time position? Like it is, yeah. Who has been, like, who as a person has been your biggest inspiration for quilting?
Oh wow. That's a there's been a lot, I would say. I have always admired Latifa Safir
Mm-hmm.
with Latifa Safir
Mm-hmm.
Studios, and how she has just always been able to produce stunning patterns
Mm-hmm.
that just really speak to me, and also because she started off as an engineer, and my degree is actually in civil engineering, and I've transitioned from engineer to quilter now, and she did that um, when she started. And so, and then also just anybody that can make a living or has figured out how to make a living
Mm-hmm.
doing what they love and finding a job that is fulfilling but also um, paying your bills.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
I think I think that's like the dream, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that doesn't work out for everybody, or you might not be there yet,
Mm-hmm.
but figuring out how to, and not everybody needs to turn
Right.
their hobbies into a career. Let's go ahead and throw that out there too.
Yeah.
And so, and this might not be something I do forever, but for right now, I'm really excited that this is what I get to do. And so, seeing people that have come before me
Mm-hmm.
and done that has definitely been really inspiring.
I've,
And I know, oh,
well,
sorry.
I was gonna say I've always wanted to use her clammy ruler.
Yes.
I've
Oh, I
never
have
done
it. I
it.
have it.
I want to use it so bad. So that's on my list, like my bucket list for this year is to try to, I mean, that's going to take a lot of patience for me, but I think that would be so pretty, like with scraps.
Yes, yes. I haven't made the clammy quilt, but I have the ruler, and she has other patterns you can make with the ruler.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a circle quilt,
Mm-hmm.
and I should have brought that over here to have to show, but I forgot. But yes, her patterns and her rulers are really versatile
Mm-hmm.
and really striking and super modern. I really gel with her style.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to plug Jen Hewitt
Uh-huh.
has a book called This Long Thread, and it's about women of color and their like crafty journeys. And that book has been super inspiring to me as well. And it's something that I just kind of read. You could just read one or two stories every night and get inspired by different women who like all different crafty fields too,
Mm-hmm.
not just quilting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah.
Do you label your quilts at all? Like, do you have any tips for labeling your quilts?
So I will say when I first started, that was really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And just over the years, I have fallen out of the habit. I don't think any of these here that I have are labeled. The quilts I've made for my kids, I've committed to making one for each of my kids and also for each of my immediate nieces and nephews.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of those are labeled,
Mm-hmm.
I think. Most of them are labeled. And I used to embroider. Oh my gosh. I used to embroider labels and I would put like Bible verses, and it was like a whole, the label was, just as important, the design of the label as was the quilt. And I had so much fun with that, but I've fallen out of the habit and I need to get back into it. It's really important to label your quilts so that way, wherever that quilt goes in the future, whoever gets it will
Mm-hmm.
know who made it, when they made it, why they made it, and we'll have all the history of that quilt in that label. So
Yeah,
thank you for the reminder.
yeah, like I have this like vision of like when I die one day, like I'm gonna have like 500 quilts and like all these antique stores around everywhere because I have made so many. Like, where could they all go? So I do try to label mine. I think maybe one or two get through a year, but most of them I label.
Okay.
And earlier we talked about the pressing to one side and pressing open, but to expand on that, and I think this really doesn't matter, but she says she thought if you press to one side, your quilt was stronger. Does it matter if quilting on a domestic versus long arm?
I don't know that I've ever had a quilt fall apart
Yeah.
on me. I mean,
Yeah.
so I don't. The only thing that I have had happen is the quilts that get a lot of use in my house. The quilting stitches might start to come undone.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never had.
Yeah.
I guess I don't have any antique quilts, so maybe in 50 years you'll start to see a difference. But I've never. So I think this quilt probably gets the most use in my house, and like I've never had a quilt fall apart, so
Right.
I can't quite say
Right.
what the answer to that is. So I would say it really doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think it's personal preference. And like, I always feel like, oh, if it falls apart, I'm probably dead. So it's fine. Doesn't matter. I don't have to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. What happens more to me, actually, and there's a quilt over here, and I'm curious what you think about this, is any quilt I've ever done that has a lot of white background just starts to get dingy and stains.
Yeah.
So as I quilt more, I'm less likely to use just a solid white and would rather use, like either a low volume or just something different. And I'm curious what your experience is with that, because I know it's kind of the easy thing to do is get a really fun pre-cut and then throw some white fabric with it and call it a day. But
yeah, I'd like to use like a polka dot because I feel like that adds movement. So I tend to use a polka dot a lot, but I have a tied pin in like every room in our house. So my kids even know, like, if they spill something, they better have that tied pin on it. They know how to do it before I come in the room. But I do tend to use white a lot, but I'm not great with solids. I don't know what it is about solids, but they just don't spark my joy, whatever you call that. You know, they just don't. And so I use polka dot a lot.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get that feel of a white, but it's not just like a stark white.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything you want to talk about with this quilt or to inspire people to donate more? We're now at 58%, I think. And
wow.
So anything to inspire people to donate or anything, you want to talk about with your business or just anything you want to tell the Fat Quarter Shop customers?
I think I'm just really excited to get people outdoors. And I know you're like, this is a quilt along. Why are we talking about getting outside and going for a walk? That we should be talking about quilting. But I just think it's just so good for our mental health and for our bodies and for our relationships. I just know that, whenever my kids, whenever we are not having a great day, just getting out and going for a walk, just changes things.
It does.
And so I'm really excited not only to, make this quilt with mountains and stars, but also for us all to challenge ourselves to get outside and explore nature as a quilting and sewing community. So I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I do too. So we're going to give away 3 quilt kits. It does come with the triangle paper to make the stars. And to win, we're going to pick 3 winners on Monday. And the winners will be in the community tab. But to enter to win, you have to comment below and let us know, like Michelle was talking about, she likes to get outside. What is something that you enjoy in your life that is good for your mental health? That'd be a great question to get people to answer, because I think that'd be fun to see what other people do besides quilting. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome.